Howdy folks, this is Mr. Miller. I'm not sure who else it would be, but it's me coming here from the coronavirus bunker. We are on day 9 of our seclusion, quarantine, whatever you want to call it. It's Wednesday the 25th of March. That's what my computer tells me. I've lost all track of time and days and any of that. I just can't keep track of it all anymore. So it's crazy what a little seclusion will do to you. Hopefully everybody is safe and healthy and doing just as well riding out this virus. Today we're focused on starting out in World War II here with topic 14. So for you guys, as you are looking in this Google Classroom page, there are a couple different files there that you might have interest in, one of the which you need, which is the notes sheet, the student notes sheet. I think that's what it's called. The others are just additional things. So I've attached a copy of the PowerPoint that I'll use today and for the rest of the unit in there, as well as my master copy of the notes, which are in there too. So you can utilize both of those. However, I would suggest listening along to this and marking things down as you see fit, and then filling in the gaps later on. So we're going to start out here with the beginning of topic 14, which is, like I said, World War II, kind of the build up to World War II, and a lot of kind of the America's involvement in that. Again, I would caution any potential people who are out there who are like, oh, I can't wait to talk about all these battles. The problem is with, I don't necessarily know if it's a problem because I don't really mind it, but in American history, again, I'll remind you what I reminded you guys when we talked about World War I. The focus for our course is not so much on the battles that are happening in Europe. Sure, we'll talk about some of them. Or in the Pacific. Sure, we'll talk about some of them. But that is not the focus. The focus is instead kind of what is going on in America at the time. You guys already know from global history a lot more detail than I'm going to go into about World War II and the actual fighting. This is more of a focus on what's going on here in America while this war is happening. How do we get involved? What are our opinions on the war? What sorts of things are going on around the country? How do we get involved in the war effort? All that stuff. So that's kind of the focus here. So keep that in mind as you go. I am always interested in hearing other perspectives. So if you have comments or questions, you can email me. My email's on the Google Classroom, tmiller@moraviaschool.org. But you can just send me an email, and I'd be more than happy to hear what you've got to say, or also provide resources for you if you wanted some more of a different focus on this stuff, which is fine, but just let me know on that. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let me go ahead and pull up, be ready. This is a little bright. Whoa, gold. I think it's gold. It's supposed to be gold. That's the color that I was told it was. So this golden color here, topic 14, is our topic. Now, I would also say the first 3 points on these notes are probably going to be review from global history, so that's fine. Just kind of keep in mind what we're dealing with here in the beginning of this war. You already have a lot of information about this war kind of at your disposal that you already know about. So we're going to kind of advance through this stuff 1 through 3, and then we'll get into kind of how America starts to get involved a little bit. So to start with here, number 1, Stalin, Mussolini, and Hitler. We have totalitarian leaders. Totalitarian is a good word to know. I didn't write that on my board over here, but totalitarian leaders, we have basically the idea with a totalitarian leader, it's total control. It's a dictatorship, and you have these people gaining total control of all aspects of their country. These 3 guys were probably the most well-known, or some of the most well-known totalitarians in world history. To start with, you have these guys kind of gaining power throughout the 1920s and 30s. So these 3 guys here are all active in this Second World War. So to start with, we've got Joseph Stalin, who is pictured over on the left. Joseph Stalin, the guy who's saluting or waving. I don't know what he's doing, but he's the guy there with the thick mustache. So Joseph Stalin, he is the leader of the communists in the Soviet Union. So he takes over control of the Soviet Union in 1924, oversees a lot of a lot of negative stuff that happens in the Soviet Union. He would classify it as really good things, but in the Soviet Union there were over 10 million people that died under Joseph Stalin's command. So not the greatest in terms of protecting lives. So you know about Joseph Stalin from world history. Second guy there is the lesser of the three. His name is Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini was the fascist dictator of Italy, and he takes power in 1922. So in 1922 you have Italy turning to Mussolini, and like I said, Mussolini's a fascist. He is a very, very extreme reactionary, kind of bringing Italy back up to prestige after World War I is kind of his focus. So Benito Mussolini. The third guy is probably the most famous one out of all this. Adolf Hitler is his name, as you know. So Adolf Hitler leads, and I wrote up here just in case you wanted to see, the Nazi Party, leads the Nazi Party in Germany. So Adolf Hitler leading the Nazi Party. In Germany, they had very widespread depression. We were talking about this when we were going over our conversation about money and different issues with our Great Depression. In Germany, they were facing similar depression, but they were facing the issues because essentially they didn't have any money to pay off those reparations to England and France after World War I. So they run out of money. They start printing more. They go into hyperinflation. It's just a very, very bad situation. So Germany facing issues, and Adolf Hitler comes into power in the 1920s and takes over and leads into kind of this Nazi Party. So the Germans are what we'll be talking a lot about kind of going forward, but just so that we're kind of all clear with the background here. Now, moving on to number 2, okay, territorial expansion and appeasement. There were countries that were expanding, specifically Germany and Italy. The Soviet Union didn't do a ton, at least not that we're going to mention. They were expanding, but not specifically where we're talking about. So expansion in Europe and Asia, we've got this kind of thirst for power, this desire to control new areas. A country that we've not talked about yet so far would be Japan. Japan had ended up using their I guess newfound strength and kind of a nationalist idea, nationalism, in order to start taking over other countries, specifically China. So China gets part of it invaded, expanded into by Japan. You guys know from last year information about the rape of Nanking, which we don't really need to go into right now because that's not really the scope of our conversation. But I know Mr. Shamil talks a lot about that. So that is something where you guys already have some decent information on the brutalities that Japanese brought with them as they went to these other places. They're also expanding into the Pacific Ocean. They end up taking over the Philippines, which America had owned at the time, taking over a bunch of other islands in the Pacific Ocean too. Now, Germany and Italy, okay, I've got a map here. So we've got expansion that happens. Italy's this, I think this is an orange. I don't know. I'm colorblind, so I don't know. Yeah, so Italy ends up expanding a little bit beyond their borders. Germany ends up expanding into different areas. They end up taking over Austria, end up taking over this territory. I'm kind of outlining it with my mouse, if you can see that. Right to the west of Germany, it's called the Rhineland. They take over Ethiopia down in Africa, which is south of here. So they are expanding in large numbers in Germany, or Germany's expanding in large numbers. Now, we have an example of a lot of European powers, specifically at the League of Nations. A lot of European powers are kind of questioning how best to deal with Germany at this point. Germany is just expanding. They don't really care too much about everybody else's opinions, and they don't really care too much to follow the rules. So America at this point is not involved. But European powers, they start to question, how do we deal with Germany? They end up adopting a policy, as is listed in the heading to this number, called appeasement. Appeasement, again, something that you guys know about from last year. Appeasement is just this idea that you kind of need to give in. You need to allow them to do what they want or what they're going to do, but just say, okay, we'll let you do this one time, but don't do it again. Don't do it again. If you know anything about basic human behavior, you probably know that, me saying just don't do it again probably isn't going to stop me from doing it again, because I got away with it once. Why wouldn't I be able to get away with it again? So that part is a questionable approach. So here you've got a political cartoon over here. Here is Adolf Hitler marching, and he is marching up the backs of what are labeled the spineless leaders of democracy down below here. The spineless leaders of democracy. So he is marching all the way up and basically able to just take advantage of them and do whatever he wants to do. So that's kind of the deal with that. Now, number 3. Number 3 is German advances here. German advances. So Germany ends up expanding even further beyond those other areas that I had already talked about, like the Rhineland and Austria. They end up expanding into new places, which I've got a big picture here. I've got listed here like Czechoslovakia, Belgium is over here to the east, to the west of Germany. So they end up invading into those areas, and then France as well. So France is kind of one of the first major countries to fall to Germany here. Germany utilizes a technique that you guys know of that I'm sure Mr. Shamel has talked about a lot, but I have it up here on my board in black. Blitzkrieg, right there. So Blitzkrieg, you know what that is. It's a lightning war. It is very fast warfare. It is what enabled the Germans to be able to conquer these countries in a matter of days, if not weeks, in terms of the speed at which they could take over these areas. Now, Germany ends up signing a very important piece of legislation. Not legislation. They sign a very important agreement with the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union, if you are looking at this map over here, is over here to the east on the right-hand side of the map. Germany is expanding into Eastern Europe a little bit, so you can kind of see how they're expanding. But in 1939, before all of this expansion is over, Germany actually signs what we call a non-aggression pact, basically saying that they're promising to not attack each other. They sign this pact with the Soviet Union. So the idea is, okay, we're not going to attack the Soviet Union at all, and that's going to be the deal. So that non-aggression pact enables Germany to, at this point, only fight on one side, which is kind of what they wanted. So they're able to invade France. They actually start to attack Britain too, the United Kingdom, which is up here, just north of France. So the United Kingdom is kind of next on their list. Germany ends up fighting the Battle of Britain, which is fought over England, which is it's a kind of an air battle for the most part. Hitler does not invade England, though. He's kind of waiting to do that. Doesn't really want to do that quite yet. So German aggression, though, while it is kind of paused for the moment here in 1939, 1940, we end up with kind of this moment where the rest of the world is kind of put on notice and saying, okay, well, what are we going to do here? We need to try to stop Germany as much as possible. So that's kind of the decision made there. So that is all that I've got for that one. Now we're going to move on to number 4 here. Let me go ahead and try to get this thing switched over to number 4. Okay, so America stays neutral. So with I'm getting word from my producer. I got to cut away here for a quick commercial break. I'll be right back. Okay, I apologize immensely for that. These advertisers that I've got signing up for these videos, they are just ruthless, and they come in and butt into my show and don't allow me to finish what I'm trying to say. They rudely interrupted me. I'm very, very sorry for that. I would have preferred to have it at the very end, but they jumped in there. So we're back now. I'll yell at them. I'll make a phone call and yell at them later. So I apologize for that. But we're back now. So let's go ahead and jump back into where I left off before I was interrupted, and that is at number 4 here, which is America staying neutral. So America staying neutral here, we have most Americans at this point, in regards to, I guess at this point we're talking about like the 1930s, middle of the 1930s. At this point, do not want to be involved in a war. We do not want to be involved in any European conflict that may or may not be breaking out. Even before Germany starts attacking all of these other countries, we do not want to get involved with anything. That is not our job. That is not our place. That is not our deal. So that's kind of the idea there. We are, again, if you think about it, we are still in the middle of this Great Depression. We are not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. Unemployment's still in double digits, and we still have lots of issues in our own land that we're trying to work on. So we definitely do not want to get involved in other people's business at this point. We are not in we are in no place to be able to do that. So a very popular opinion is what's depicted here in this badge: keep U.S. out of war, be neutral. So that's kind of the idea. Now, what America does do, interestingly enough, is we pass a series of laws that I've got pictured, or that I've got written up here in blue, called the Neutrality Acts. The Neutrality Acts. The idea with the Neutrality Acts, they would limit our interactions with other countries, specifically countries that are maybe at war with other countries. The main idea with Neutrality Act is to try to keep us out of any potential conflicts. We viewed conflict as kind of like a magnet. It would suck us in. It would drag us in there. So if we get involved with these other countries, we would get sucked in eventually. So we are trying to avoid that as much as possible, and Neutrality Acts are a way to do that. So we end up passing, if my memory serves me correctly, I think 3 or 4 Neutrality Acts over the course of 1935 to 1939. There was almost a new Neutrality Act every year. And so those Neutrality Acts are meant to, again, try to keep us out of conflict. An example of what one of these might include: Americans can't sail on ships owned by countries that are at war with another country. That was probably in direct response to, if you remember, the Lusitania, the sinking of the Lusitania, which was a British ship that had a bunch of American passengers on it in 1917, 16 or 17. I'm blanking on the detail at this point, but it ends up kind of being one of those reasons why we get pulled into World War I. So that's just an example of what the Neutrality Acts would pertain to. Now, let me talk about this political cartoon here. This is a political cartoon. If you can read down in the bottom corner, right in the bottom right-hand corner, you will see that it is by a very famous artist or illustrator. His name is Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss was just a guy, but he wrote children's books, but he also did a bunch of political cartoons. So Dr. Seuss here makes a political cartoon that shows Uncle Sam sleeping in a bed on the left, and it says, "What a lucky thing, we've got separate beds." And at the bottom there it says, "Ho hum, no chance of contagion, no chance of spreading the virus." Okay, this is very applicable to nowadays. Okay, if you are, let's say that you are in a room with somebody who has the coronavirus, and you are like 2 feet away from them and like sleeping on the couch next to somebody who has coronavirus. Okay, you're probably going to get it. So that's why we have these whole things called social distancing, right? So social distancing is this idea where you need to be 6 feet apart from each other so you can't catch what they have. So even better, just stay away from them altogether. So this is kind of a similar perspective here. You've got Uncle Sam, the American guy, sleeping next to Europe, who has a bunch of different sicknesses: Nazi fever, Stalin itch, Blitzpox, fascist fever, Hitleritis, and then underneath the bed there is a cat who's sick with the Italian mumps. So there you've got all these sicknesses that we want to avoid, but we are so close to them that we're really going to have no chance of avoiding them. We are going to get sick because we are putting ourselves right next to them. So how does this ultimately kind of drag us into the war? We're going to look at here right in number 5. So in number 5 here, we have, let me go ahead and advance further, Roosevelt Preparing for War. It is kind of a perspective that is taken at this point into the late 1930s that we are going to be involved in this war eventually, and we better be ready for it, or we are going to not be ready for it, and it's going to take us by surprise. So sure, we're still trying to be neutral, but the feeling is kind of turning in America to say, you know, we're going to get involved in this eventually, even though we don't want to. So Roosevelt, FDR here, ends up preparing for war. So he gets very worried in the 1930s and 40s, late 1930s, I guess I would say, about the powers that are called the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan. Worried that they are going to pull us into a war at some point soon. So we get worried here, and Roosevelt ends up creating a couple different programs. To start with, we're going to talk about what is here in green up here. It is called the Selective Service Act. The Selective Service Act. The Selective Service Act is a law that basically populates a draft pool to be able to draft people into the military, even if we are at peace. So people sign up for selective service because they have to, but then you also have a group of people to pull from when we need a draft. So the Selective Service Act he passes in the late 1930s to create kind of a draft population. So when we do go to war, we are ready, if and when we do. The other thing that I would mention here is that Roosevelt also tries to calm the American people down at this point. He gives probably what is his most famous, well, one of his most famous speeches. We'll talk about another famous one tomorrow. But one of his most famous speeches is pictured, or is mentioned there. It's called the Four Freedoms Speech. The Four Freedoms Speech. Now, the Four Freedoms Speech, he basically gives this speech to the American people, and it's just meant to calm us down and say, you know, Americans, we have freedoms that are going to be protected. In America, we're a land of freedom and a land of opportunity. So he kind of takes this opportunity to outline the main freedoms that Americans have and should have that are protected. So I've got the four freedoms listed right here in black. So he says, first, Americans, we have the freedom of speech, which is a First Amendment freedom. First Amendment freedom of speech. We can say what we want to say within reason, as long as it's not hateful and as long as it's not dangerous to others. So we have freedom of speech. We also have freedom of worship, which would be considered freedom of religion. So freedom of speech, freedom of worship, and then we also have, let me move my finger out of the thing there, we also have freedom from want, okay, freedom from want, meaning as Americans, we have the freedom to not want things. We have the freedom to be free of that desire. Now, it says that we still might want things, but we shouldn't be in a place where we can't get what we want as Americans. So freedom from want, we have everything that we need, essentially. And then the last one there is freedom from fear, which is more applicable during the 1930s and 40s, and it's also probably applicable today if you were to think about it. So the freedom from fear, saying Americans, we have the right to not be afraid of things. Because we live in a great country and because we live in a country that is going to protect us and always have our back, we have the freedom to not be afraid. That should be something, fear should not be something that we kind of worry about or are afraid of. Can I say that you can't be afraid of being afraid? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's essentially what he's saying. Okay, don't fear fear. You shouldn't be fearing anything, which I think plays into today when you're talking about this big coronavirus. If you're thinking about like, okay, what's going to happen? Am I fearing for the economy? Am I fearing for my loved ones? All that stuff. We just need to kind of take a breath and trust that the government's going to kind of help us out with this and kind of pull us out of this. So that's kind of the idea there. And I think a lot of people would still say that freedom from fear is still an idea that is around today. So these four freedoms, this four freedom speech is just meant to, just encourage Americans and say, we're facing this situation with this rising violence in Europe, and we have the freedom to be, keep doing what we've been doing, but not be afraid of things, not want anything. Have the freedom to still maintain our way of life in terms of our worship, and have the ability to maintain our freedom of speech. So the four freedom speech, it's a very famous speech there by FDR leading up to this Second World War. Now, at this point, I have to be done because I'm over my time, actually. So I want to quit there. I was planning on getting through number 6. We'll have to catch it up there tomorrow, though. So number 6, we'll start out with how America gets involved into the war, and then we will talk about ultimately how America gets pulled in officially with Pearl Harbor tomorrow. So that's where I got to leave off. There are 2 essential questions that are posted on the Google Classroom, so go ahead and do those at this point and answer those questions, and that'll be all for today. Again, I apologize for that brief interruption in the middle there. I'm going to go make a phone call and yell at my sponsors here, so hopefully that doesn't happen again. Otherwise, heads will roll, maybe. Just kidding, I'm a nice person, but I'll be mad. Okay, that's all I've got. I'm actually going to say goodbye this time. So, see ya. It's Wednesday. See you tomorrow, Thursday. We'll be at 10 days tomorrow. Okay, that's all I got to say. Bye.